Hi, my name is Akin Hyatt.
Hi, my name is Lauren McCaffrey.
And this is our Lab 7 video summary. Some phenomena in optics require a wave description to fully understand, such as propagation. Since light propagation is a part of all optical systems, it's important to understand these systems from a physical optics perspective. According to Huygens' principle, we can treat each point on a wave as a spherical point source. The propagated wavefront is then a summation of these new waves. When these waves interact with an aperture, some get blocked, thus changing the shape of the propagated wave. For a circular aperture, we see diffraction like this, in the z direction. Notice how as we travel further from the aperture, the radial irradiance oscillations become slower, producing fewer and fewer rings, or Fresnel zones. The total number of rings is the Fresnel number. We also notice alternating bright and dark spots in the center of the beam. Each transition from dark to bright removes one Fresnel zone until we reach the Airy pattern for NF equals 1. In general, we can quantify this Fresnel number with these equations for any given incident spherical wave. We can continue our analysis by applying these ideas to imaging. When a system images a point source, the resulting image will not be a point image, but instead a finite distribution. This is called the point spread function, or PSF. A finite spot size also implies a fundamental limit on the system resolution. The system's frequency response to these point objects is known as the modulation transfer function, or MTF, and determines the minimum resolvable spatial frequency. An image is then formed by either a convolution of the object with the PSF, or a multiplication in the frequency domain by the MTF. To see the diffraction of a collimated source, we simply stop down the incident beam to a relatively small diameter and observe the different patterns for each Fresnel number. We chose a 5x microscope objective since it is the minimum needed to see the beam, and designed the beam expander such that the expanded beam is at least 1 inch in diameter. For a focus source, we're interested in measuring the defocus range of the system for plus or minus 1 wave. Therefore, a 1 meter focal length lens is placed in front of the aperture. The defocus range is found by taking the difference between NF equals 2 regions as seen here. We then vary the iris size and observe how this range varies with aperture.
To measure the line spread function, or LSF, of an optical system, in this case a long focal length lens, we effectively scan a vertical slit horizontal across the diffraction pattern produced by placing an aperture close behind the lens. For the experimental setup testing a 1000 mm focal length lens, we opted for an approximately 7 mm diameter aperture in order to ensure that we produced an Airy pattern that was measurable, or greater than 200 microns, provided the resolution limitations of the equipment in lab. We calculated the aperture size from the Airy disc diameter d. As seen here, we were able to implement an aperture size that closely matched our design threshold. Furthermore, we determined the necessary slit width for the LSF measurement by taking the inverse of the cutoff spatial frequency, which was approximately 80 microns. Before proceeding, one interesting metric is how the separation distance between the plus and minus 1 wave of defocus changes as a function of aperture radius a. As seen here, we can theoretically calculate this curve by solving for the z sub 2 values at each of those planes. Our experimental data closely matched the theory, whereby increasing the aperture radius decreased the distance between the two defocus planes for reasonably sized apertures. This trend makes sense given that we typically prefer to implement larger apertures in optical systems in order to minimize optical path differences and therefore diffraction effects when aberration effects are small. After collecting our LSF data, we can analyze the results with the MTF MATLAB program provided. Seen here is the background-corrected, unnormalized raw data in the line spread function. Furthermore, the program calculates the MTF for the experimental cutoff frequency, the raw data obtained from the LSF measurements, and the transfer function accounting for the diffraction effects of the slit, or the slit transfer function. The point spread function is also included. Provided that we know the testing lens specifications and the implemented aperture parameters, we may also simulate the MTF properties in Zmax. Similar to the analytically and empirically calculated cutoff spatial frequencies in the previous slides, we observed a frequency of about 12 line pairs per millimeter, a diffraction-limited MTF plot in Zmax at the best focus, and a recognizable Airy pattern for the point spread function. Next, we would repeat these calculations for the plus and minus 1 waves of defocus planes, but we're not able to collect this data in lab.